In Paradise Lost, John Milton writes, the mind is its own place, and in itself, interesting words here, can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. Oh, the mind! The mind is a garden. Thoughts are the seeds. You can grow flowers or you can grow weeds. That precious, precious garden. And holding true to the metaphor, yes, the mind is where all the BS is stored. The BS, the bullshit or belief systems. Take your pick. We can either use our minds or let our minds use us. And that's what it means to wake up. There's a story about an ancient yogi who opened his eyes during a meditation at dawn and before him saw a 15-foot coiled black cobra ready to strike. He closed his eyes again to pray, and when he opened them in the sunlight, he could see it wasn't a snake at all, but a coiled rope, and instantly he was enlightened. You see, the mind matters most. It matters most. What you know about the world will directly determine your experience of the world. Shakespeare said it best in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and his imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown. Forms of things unknown. The poet's pen turns them to shape and gives to airy nothing a local habitation, place to be, and a name. If you're listening to this now, your brain has been uploaded with about 6,000 years of technology, most of which is invisible to you and which you take for granted. Almost nothing about how we function as 21st century civilized, computer-wielding people is innate. Even the ability to count past 2 would be impossible for us if someone hadn't taught us. It's difficult to imagine, but the Piraha tribe in the Amazon have a word for 1, 2, then many, and literally cannot perform any calculations. They have the same computer as any of us, just different software. There was an image that blew up the internet recently of a dress, which, if you're like some people, was clearly white and gold, and if you're like other people, clearly black and blue. You remember this one? It's mind-blowing, but what's even more mind-blowing is that up until a few thousand years ago, human beings couldn't even see blue. Whoa, wait, what do you mean? How could someone not see blue? Well, check this out. Jules Davidoff, a psychologist from Goldsmiths University of London, worked with the Himba tribe from Namibia, who still don't have a word for blue, and no real distinction between green and blue in their language. Now, to go back one farther paragraph, in ancient Greek in Homer's time, there was no mention of blue. There was only the wine dark sea. There was no mention of the color of the sky. And in none of the literature of the time do we ever see a word for blue. Now, to see if they could actually identify the color blue, Jules basically had 12 squares. 11 were green and 1 was painfully blue. And guess what? They couldn't identify the 1 blue square out of all the 12 squares, 11 green squares. And it goes both ways because the Himba have almost triple the amount of words for green as we do. And we're able to distinguish 1 slightly, just shade different green square from 11 similar green squares. And guess what? They got it right every time, whereas Westerners failed every time. So to bring it back to the lion in the last pillar, how many of you have had the experience of changing the way you see a thing and the thing changes? Being startled in the middle of the night that an intruder is standing in the room only to realize that it's just a coat and hat sitting on the back of a chair. If you change the way you see a thing, the whole thing changes. Most of us think we're experiencing reality. Not true. We experience our own interpretations of reality. You have 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, 2 ears, senses, and your skin. Any stimulus in the world is being processed through your unique nervous system, the doors of perception. One person looks at a dog and sees a pet, another sees a threat, and another sees food. And it's not even quite that simple. For example, no depressed person ever thinks they put on a gray veil and are seeing the world through the haze of a bad mood. No, not at all. They think that the veil has been taken away, the veil of happiness, and that they're finally seeing the world truly. We can't call what we do integral fitness without a brief mention of Ken Wilber's integral theory. And without getting into a full exegesis on spiral dynamics, stages of development, and the Wilber-Combs matrix, all really cool stuff, let me say that the reason why this may be hard to digest or fully understand, or the reason why you may be getting a bad taste in your mouth right now, is because society has taught us our entire life a story about functional or ontological fixedness. Here is the way things are. We've even been taught science as though scientific method of falsification yielded absolute truth. And scientific materialism has become the new in vogue intellectual standard of reason. Popper would be kind of rolling around in his grave right now, because it's not. Dogma is dogma, and dogma is a beautiful thing, but I bet if you're watching this video, or if you're like me, you've been consistently unsatisfied with dogmatic answers, not because they aren't comforting, but because they're not true. For thousands of years, people could not beat a 4-minute mile. 4-minute mile. The Greeks tied men to horses, and modern scientists devised special suits and shoes. And then finally, experts said it was just impossible. Then, all of a sudden, between 1954 and 1959, over 20 people broke the 4-minute mile. All it took was one man, Roger Bannister, to prove it was possible for the first time in history. And literally 6 weeks later, that's it, just 6 weeks later, his record was broken by John Landy. Then about 7 months later, that record was broken by 2 more people, Laszlo Tabori-Hun and Chris Chataway. And it's continued to be broken ever since. And now a 4-minute mile is the new standard of men's middle distance running, and about 10 to 20 American men break the 4-minute mile for the first time each year. Worldwide, that number might be like 3 to 5 times as large. I mean, kids are doing this in high school today. The mind establishes the context of our reality, and it also reads the map to shift it. For example, how many people know about the 6 levels of change? On top is the environment, a great place to start. Sometimes it's just as easy as, if it's raining here, move over there. But as they say, you can take the man out of Pittsburgh, but you can't always take Pittsburgh out of the man. Behavior, number 2, or I guess 5. Someone else's or our own. A man walks into a doctor and says, "Doc, it hurts every time I do this." And the doctor says, "Well, then stop doing that." Sometimes it can be that easy. The next is capability. Sometimes we just don't know something. If you're trying to solve a geometric equation and you don't know the formula of the area of a circle is pi r squared, then it doesn't matter how hard you pray, how hard you try, you're not going to solve it. Next is belief. As the famous words go, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right. Researchers have found that just believing you're going to do worse on a math exam makes you do worse. And similarly, in one of my favorite studies of all time, making a child chosen at random think that they're special leads them to actually outperforming their peers. It's amazing. And next is identity. One layer deeper, identity. You see, someone can believe that smoking is bad or eating junk food isn't good for them. But if smoking or eating junk food is part of their identity, then they'll keep doing this. See, I used to be a vegetarian and a raw foodist for years, and I can tell you the single key to determining whether or not someone stuck with it was how they identified themselves. If someone saw himself as a meat eater who was deciding to eat vegetables for a while, they wouldn't last very long. Instead, if someone strongly identified meat with toxic poison, eating it as a sin punishable by death or shaming, and themselves as an absolute pure vessel of the light, you could guarantee they wouldn't touch meat even if they were starving. Identity does more to shape behavior than beliefs or capability. Finally, even below that is spirit. Spirit. This is our core beneath identity. This goes beyond identity. It's not what we are, a doctor, a lawyer, a son, an artist, a vegetarian, a meat eater. It's who we are, what our purpose is, why we're here. A change here changes everything. There are the road to Damascus experiences of our life where we go from Paul to Saul or Saul to Paul, where literally everything we ever valued is inverted. We may wear the same body, but we're not the same person. One of my favorite examples of this is a man named Charles Mully. I truly consider this man to be not only a modern day hero, but the closest thing I've seen to a modern day saint. He went from a homeless beggar to the richest man in Kenya, and then decided to give his entire fortune away to raise orphan children. And since then has raised over 10,000 children and literally transformed the desert where they live into a rainforest. It's an amazing story, and I suggest you all watch the documentary about his life. It's amazing spiritual transformation. Or take Noah Levine, the founder of Against the Stream Buddhism. He went from a thug snorting crack in and out of jail to Buddhist monk and a leading mindfulness teacher. It's amazing. You see, just knowing these layers can severely influence your life. And it's not just a frame, but frames are important. As Deepak Chopra would say, human beings have about 60,000 thoughts a day to frame their reality. The problem is that they're usually the same 60,000 thoughts they had yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that, and maybe their whole lives. We love novelty, but we're allergic to change. It feels uncomfortable at first, but it's like stretching. If you can't, you must. The harder it is for you to touch your toes, the more important it is for you to do it. The resistance, that tightness, is an indicator of the importance of the act. It is that gateway to growth. See, I used to be terribly afraid of cold calling and rejection. I was seeing each rejection as a nail through my skin. And yes, it may have been a battle wound and I might have been earning my stripes, but I wasn't excited for the next call. Then someone gave me a whole new frame to try on. They asked me, about how many phone calls do you need to make before you would expect to close one? I said, well, obviously if I made 100, I'd be guaranteed to have at least one deal close. Great, they said. And about how much money would that one deal be worth? I said, sheesh, it could be worth about $10,000. Great, they said. So now take the amount you'd make and divide it by the number of people you'd have to reach out to in order to make that deal. So 10,000 divided by 100, that's $100. Then he said, instead of looking at it like you have to endure the randomness of 100 rejections before you land the deal, instead what's really happening is that you're actually making $100 for each person who says no, because it's getting you one step closer to yes. And now that was a radically different frame. From then on, every time I picked up the phone, instead of thinking, oh shoot, are they gonna say yes or no? I said, I hope this person says no fast so I can make my $100 and move on. And guess what? It took less than 100 phone calls to close those deals. So I was making more money than 100 for each no I heard. Radically different frame, radically different results. If our paradigm is off, if our perspective is uncalibrated, we're going to be heading towards the rocks and not the shore. Now, how is that like your life? Where are you holding yourself back? Where are you telling yourself a story about what you can't do instead of about what you can do? Where are you damming up the reservoirs of energy and happiness solely because it doesn't fit in with your current belief system? What does it take to break that spell? I don't believe any of us would rationally choose a disempowering belief system, but the problem is that we're blind to any possibility that subreps the vision of life we've trusted. As I mentioned before, it takes a leap of faith to adopt a new paradigm or a severe crisis, and it's usually the latter. Think about your life and think back to some of the biggest turning points of your existence. Chances are you weren't wonderful and decided, oh hey, I'm gonna take it up a notch. No. Chances are you were in a crisis, pushed against a brick wall at the limit of your fire corridor and surrendered to a new choice. And voila, it worked out fantastically. But you couldn't believe it at the time. You just did it because it was necessary. See, here's an interesting question. When do people change? Really, ask it honestly. When do people change? When do I change? Or anyone else in my life for that matter? The answer is when they have to. If we remember this, others' behavior and even our own won't seem so mysterious and counterintuitive. We all have different bottoms. I personally have developed a shallow bottom for myself, so I hit it fast and start swimming up for dear life as soon as possible. And some people never find their bottom, and they just keep sinking towards it in a never-ending abyss. It's not a reality, it's a choice. I don't study physics and psychology and gaze at my navel and try too many drugs and one day touch my bottom and know it for good. That's why so many don't find theirs. Instead, I just put a stake in the ground somewhere, anywhere, and say, this is it. This is my limit. And just like we can look at a map and see the clear boundaries and dividing lines, when we're in it, all that flies out the window, and it's up to us alone to choose, am I here or am I there? With a chorus of voices behind us to argue otherwise. See, most of us have old operating systems installed in our brains. Certain knowledge is transformational. It doesn't just tickle our minds, it upgrades our actual capacities. Mathematics and language are two examples. Like I said, numbers are not innate. The fact that you can count to 10 means you have a highly developed software upgrade already inside your skull. Cut out language, kiss your ability to navigate from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Goodbye. Compare this to the Pirahã tribe in the Amazon. The software, technology, the average Westerner carries between our ears is highly sophisticated and more powerful at computing the world. With that said, it's often said that we only use 10% of our brains. Well, this is about as true as if I told you that most people only use 10% of their bodies, meaning they're only using about 10% of their body's potential. They're lazy and overweight, and they could be athletic. Maybe they could even be Olympic. Mastering this pillar of the mind is giving you a mental software update. It doesn't take too long to install it either. Once you get it, you don't look at the world the same. Your vision will literally be expanded. When I said earlier in my first video that I had literally learned and passed a 4-year placement exam of Spanish in a month, that was only possible because I upgraded my capacity in order to learn and remember things. Now, when we truly learn to see the invisible forces that shape our destiny, we can use them instead of being used by them. It's like stepping into the matrix. Upgrading our mind is about transforming the invisible. It's about transforming the invisible. 5,000 years ago, the average Athenian would have seen storm clouds approaching and thought, Iolaus is coming, and prayed. Today, we check our weather apps in the morning, and we figure it out from there. The Pirahã tribe in the Amazon can't count to 3, and today the New York Stock Exchange trades for about 2,800 companies in 12 different currencies. Just think that 1,000 years ago, if you had a headache, doctors would drill a hole in your skull to release the pressure. With the wrong mental model, nothing fits. Nothing will go right in your life. And you're going to suffer unnecessarily experiencing the same raw data of life, but processing it with an inferior operating system. The right paradigm is like a magical map that turns the invisible forces that shape your reality into visible forces you can work with to transform yourself and others. I spent years in college obsessed with invisible forces. These are the forces that really do influence our life. After being floored by a visual illusion that boggled my mind, I developed a simple hunch. If I could be so easily influenced and misled by a visual illusion, could there be such a thing, maybe, as cognitive, spiritual, philosophical, or emotional illusions as well? And what I found out is that there were quite a few of them. There's a lot more I could get into here with illusions as a passion of mine. For example, why do almost 100% of Austrians register to donate their organs, where only about 10% of Germans donate their organs? Really think about this. What's different about Austria and Germany? What's different about their politics, their culture, the history of their people maybe? Or let's make it a bit weirder. In Denmark, only 5% of their people register to donate their organs, and in Sweden, about 90% of their people are organ donors. There's a reason here, and there's a right answer, so think about it. Germany 10%, Sweden 90%. Can you think of it? Here's a hint, okay? This might help you. The UK is about 17%. Think about it. Have you figured it out yet? Who guessed culture, history, religion, politics? And who guessed that it's the difference between one word on the DMV slip? Check here if you do want to be an organ donor in the Germany and the UK. And check here if you don't want to be an organ donor in Sweden and Austria. Almost 100% of the variation in organ donating has nothing to do with belief, goodness, reason, rationality, or ideology, and has everything to do with default options, the results we get by doing nothing. What other default options shape our life? Most people think they have beliefs, but more often their beliefs have them. We're shaped by the world around us in ways that the uneducated person can't fathom. And with the wrong paradigm, we're pretty much bound to be a victim in the world when we could just as easily become a victor. And while you may be tempted to think that people go with the default option because they're being careless, you're actually wrong. People go with default options precisely because they do care, don't know what to do, and feel crushed under the pressure of making the wrong decision. So they just go with the flow, the default option. Have you ever just waited in a line for no reason, but other people were waiting in that line only to find out that the line was closed and another one was open there you could have just walked right up to? And if you really want to scare yourself a bit, imagine how one small question on the DMV slip can influence the fate of millions of people in a country, and how many larger, more important decisions are being made like this by people as intelligent as you and I. And of course, no one thinks that they're guilty of behaving like this. Everyone thinks they're making the right, reasonable, well thought out decision. And in truth, we are, with a key distinction, given the information they have. In the book 1984, George Orwell said that whoever controls the past controls the future, and whoever controls the present controls the past. In the 1940s and 50s, I don't know how to even say this word, but DDT was introduced to American public to kill bugs that spread malaria and typhus in several parts of the world. Ads went out with smiling animals singing, "DDT is good for me," and trucks used to stroll down urban lanes spraying thick clouds of miasmic poison while children danced around and played in the fumes. Now, I highly doubt any of the parents would have let their play in DDT poison clouds if they had known just a little bit better. But that's just the problem. History is constantly revealing itself to us on the wrong side of today. And unless we're making a constant effort to inform ourselves and get ahead, we'll be washed up in the white noise and inertia of the masses, and paralyzed in fear of challenging the tyranny of the majority. In 1784, Immanuel Kant defined enlightenment as having the courage to use your own reason. Enlightenment is having the courage to use your own reason. Now, I've always been so humbly touched by this because some of the greatest innovations of all time came from outsiders rejected by the authorities of the time. And until a person has a direct experience of the fallibility of expert opinions, which forces them to think for themselves, we'll continue to live in a world where people will commit atrocities against their better judgment in the name of the law and the good and the right. Steve Jobs put it best when he said, "When you grow up, you tend to get told the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world. Try not to bash into the walls too much. Try to have a nice family, have fun, save a little money." But see, that's a limited life. Life can be so much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you, and you can change it. You can influence it. You can build your own things that other people can use. And once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. The main lesson here is that there is free will and determinism. Yes, your life is completely determined by three fates: biological determinism, the presets of your genes and inherent nervous system; psychological determinism, your heredity, upbringing, your needs, rules, and values; and environmental determinism, default options, restrictions, and mobilities. That is until you decide to wake up and wield your ultimate freedom, because hidden between every stimulus and response is the choice to do things differently. Not everyone finds this freedom, but no one can take it away from you. And even if we have the right view, if I can't teach this to my friends, my parents, my children, and everyone I come into contact with, well then, to paraphrase the wise words of Hillel, if I'm only for myself, then who will be for me? And we'll talk more about that when we get into the social contribution pillar, but for now, let's move into the body, baby.